you really got to get to the value like right in the first 30 seconds, right? If conversations like what a Joe Rogan does with this expectation that we see on YouTube that the shows have to be, very highly produced and quality with lead-ins that are enticing to get people to keep listening or watching. I published like maybe 20 videos and they got over, those 20 videos got like over 1 million views. Mm-hmm. And it was like, how did that happen?
Hello, I'm Dustin PolyInnovator. Today I'm welcoming on the PolyTools Creator Spotlight Rob Greenlee, who is a podcaster, radio broadcaster for 24 years, is a 2017 Podcast Hall of Fame inductee, host of the Podcast Tips, Spoken Life, Trust Factor, New Media Show, and more, founder of Spoken Life Media, and podcasting pioneer. Thank you for joining me on the show.
It's great to be here, Dustin. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I know that we have crossed paths a couple times at different conferences, but we haven't had a chance to really sit down and talk until today. So it's nice to have you here face to face, if you will.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to digging deep on topics around content creation and podcasting and all that kind of stuff. Whatever you would like to talk about, it's all fun for me.
Yeah.
So
same. I think too, what's going to be really interesting is since you've been in the space for so long too, you've been able to see how the different waves have gone on. And I always think it's really interesting. People always say it's too late to become a podcaster or a YouTuber because they think, it's too saturated. But then a couple years go by and then we have another huge wave. And I've been through a few of them myself, but I've only been around, a fourth or half of the time you've been doing it. So what have you seen with all these different waves for any of them, really?
Yeah, I think we've gone through different phases in the podcasting space. I mean, I started back in 2004, and back in those days, it was different. But I think the big takeaway really to think about is podcasting really hasn't changed that much over the 20 years that I've been doing it. But there are aspects of it that have kind of evolved, and that's how I like to think about it. Is that it's not like, I mean, back in 2004, it was a revolution. I mean, if you think about it as compared to mainstream media and kind of this movement, it was very anti-commercial. But as we've gone through the phases, what we've seen happen is kind of like a evolution towards more what I would call kind of professionalization, I guess, is the way to do it. And that may be connected to the capabilities of the tools and the growth of the internet and kind of content creation simplicity, but also at the other end of the spectrum is content creation complexity. And then also there's been a shift towards very, very talented content creators moving into this space that maybe had a lot of experience in mainstream media and that really know how to create compelling content. And that's especially on the spoken side. So, and also on the, like the audiobooks and other types of audio content have now been kind of lumped into podcasting. So we've seen a little bit here, especially over the last year. It's been very interesting because we've seen a reduction in the number of shows that are being updated on a weekly basis, right? So, or even on any basis, right? So most of the content catalog in Apple Podcasts or in Spotify are what I term as archive shows, which means that maybe they created a certain number of episodes and they also did a term called pod fading, which means that they stopped producing new episodes, right? So there's a lot of content out there, but most of it, to be quite frank with you, is not currently updating content streams, right? Or feeds, right? They are old content usually. So the number of active new shows is only like 300,000 or 400,000, though it kind of depends on how you look at it. That's still a large number of shows and that's on a global basis. So, but back when I started in 2004, there was like maybe 200 or 300 shows, right? So on that scale, there is a lot of competition out there, and there are a lot of podcasters. But you compare that to how many YouTube channels there are, which is in the multi-millions that are active, right? So that's part of where this industry is converging on itself, because you think about the energy in like a YouTube platform that is now converging and crashing back into podcasting, because what happened with YouTube kind of birthed out of of video podcasting in the early days of the medium, because when podcasting started, it was an audio and video medium, and people were putting out video content into RSS feeds back in the early days of podcasting. And then YouTube launched, and that was like back in 2006 or so.
Mhm.
And all that video content that was in the video podcasting space via RSS shifted over to YouTube. And the reason they did that was because it was a lot less expensive. Google was willing to pay for the bandwidth to deliver video, where a lot of the content creators back then didn't want to pay for the bandwidth to deliver it via RSS. So, because that was on their shoulders, it's a lot cheaper to deliver audio via RSS than it is video. So that tells you a little economic motivation for what happened back then. But YouTube has always been a big player in podcasting. It's just that it wasn't as linked to podcasting again as it is now, because YouTube decided that they were going to capture the energy out of the independent creators from the podcast industry and attract those people into YouTube to grow their content creator community and to grow
Right.
their audience. And what we've seen is YouTube has emerged really as the biggest content discovery and publishing platform in the world, and it's a lot larger than podcasting, and so it's kind of an interesting time right now.
A lot of different topics there, from like pod fade and even just the idea of video RSS. Because I heard murmurs a couple years ago about maybe video RSS kind of making a comeback. And then one thing you kind of alluded to too is a lot of these bigger names in the influencer space who may not be podcasters originally have become podcasters. I remember when Ali Abdaal or MKBHD started their podcasts, and I thought to myself, oh, about time they finally did it, because I knew they were going to eventually. And just recently, a couple of big streamers, Valkyrae and Pokimane, have started podcasts as well.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting to see how they're growing and how the difference in content, because they're used to streaming and doing gaming, and then the way they're going with the podcast is just chatting, and just seeing the difference in how they create that content too.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is kind of like a Back to the Future scenario, because all these original video creators on the YouTube platform are saying, well, I'm creating, talk content. Why don't I just put that audio out as an audio podcast? So I think, but the problem with that is that increasingly the audio side is being seen as kind of a small part, right?
Mm.
If you came into this industry from a video perspective and you've achieved big success on YouTube and you've got a huge audience and a huge following, you're making lots of money over there on YouTube, and then you add audio, you take the same or mostly the same content that you do in your video and put it out as an audio feed, your mindset is going to be that the audio side is a small part of what I'm doing.
Mm.
And I think that's what we're seeing happen in the market right now, is that if you enter podcasting as a video creator and you build big success over there, the audio part of your distribution strategy is going to be seen as a minor part, right? It's almost like it's a loss leader or a kind of just bonus opportunity to build an audience over on the audio side.
Syndicating.
Right. There's conflict there. But if you're an audio creator primarily that goes into creating an audio podcast to make a compelling experience on the audio side, your move towards video is a lot more challenging, because it causes you to have a different mindset on the content and the publishing, and it also adds a layer of work, right? So, and this is the struggle in the industry. I think what we're going to start seeing is content creators entering the space thinking equally between audio and video. But I don't think we've really hit that threshold yet.
Something I talk about a lot on this show is like, what kind of content type do you anchor to? And it's always interesting to ask that kind of question, like which one is someone's favorite? And we'll get to that for you in a little bit. But it's interesting to think about, like, okay, I started off as a blogger. I'm pretty content agnostic. I like making all three, but I do lean more towards writing just because that's what I started out with. And it's what I'm more comfortable with. And it's just interesting to think about how each one is its own skill. So even if you're a podcaster or YouTuber, you try doing the opposite, it's almost like that skill starts over. You have to do those 100 reps, the first 100 reps over again.
Yeah. And I think if you enter the content creation medium or enter podcasting from writing, you may have a opportunity that's coming in the future of taking that writing and creating audio podcasts out of it,
Yeah.
right? And then at some point, you can probably take that writing and create video podcasts with AI. So, the spectrum of what can be done here, I think the bigger question that we're all facing on this AI question is, will audience accept that content as something that they can trust, right?
Mhm.
And if it's created based on your writing, it should be, right? But the question is if it's labeled, this is AI content, people are going to be skeptical of it because a lot of people have been scared by this concept of AI generated content being deep fakes or not authentic and not real. But I kind of see it, if the content is, if the written content is generated by AI and then published as video as AI, and you've replicated yourself in that publishing process, that's where the big question marks come up. And I think that's something that we're going to have to wrestle with in the future is human generated or human created content, live content like we're doing right now, going to be valued more than AI generated content? My comment is that I think that there's a big kind of question mark about that because there may be very, very valid content that's created through using AI. It's just, how do we know to trust it?
And that really comes down to the creator. And I think even if it's AI or human, it's just a matter of like trust being built over time. And there's also the dynamic of like partially AI generated and then fully AI generated, like you're saying there. And just to shout out a couple tools, I use Beyond Words to make every one of my blog posts into an audio. So if you are visually impaired, you can listen to my blog post, or if you want to listen to it while going on a walk, you can. And while I can't clone my voice with them, I can create a podcast feed out of it. And there's also play.ht that would allow me to do probably both, allow me to clone my voice and let you listen to all my blog posts. And then I could probably use my own voice to make a podcast out of my blog. And I probably will do that at some point. But it's interesting to think about, even now, it is possible.
Yeah. I mean, if you were to get an account with 11 Labs or even the Descript tool, you can create a voice clone and just input that text, and it will create the audio, and it will sound pretty darn close to you.
Getting to the questions here, what got you started as a content creator, Rob?
Well, I started on the radio, back in 1999. I just walked into a local radio station up in the Seattle market and asked the station if they had any shows about technology and the internet, and they didn't. So I brought a couple of friends into the studio and started doing a Saturday morning show talking about the World Wide Web and the internet. This was back in February of 1999, and started doing that live in the radio station. And then I would take the audio out of the radio station on a cassette, and then I would play it through a $19 cassette player into my computer, and I made an MP3 file. And
so you were early.
And so I started making that audio file as a shoutcast stream, as well as a direct download off my website back then. So that's how I kind of got started in all this. And then over a period of time from 1999 through 2004, there were a bunch of what I term as kind of precursor platforms to podcasting that were started by small companies like Microsoft that I got in partnership with back then to make my radio show available as a download and transfer from Windows XP to the Pocket PC device back in those days. So it was very similar to podcasting and how it evolved as a kind of like a downloadable medium that transferred to a portable media player. But back then, it was between Windows XP and the Pocket PC, which is a portable media player as well. It had a screen on it, had the ability to play audio.
I think I remember them,
Yeah.
So cool.
And I made about 25 cents per transfer from Windows XP to Pocket PC devices back then on a licensing deal that I did with Microsoft. So that was very, very similar. It was called Sync and Go is what they call it. And I started working with some other platforms that were actually recording my live streams, or not my live streams, but my streams. Because back then I was delivering a lot of my content through streaming, because back in those days, people didn't have a lot of bandwidth. So So it was one of those things, and platforms were being built to record the streams and create an MP3 file and make that available as a download to users on their platform, right? So, so we had this move towards increasingly making a replay type of a situation via the MP3 files. And then podcasting started, and that was kind of a minor thing. And that just kind of grew over time. And then I took my experience in doing all that stuff and started working for companies, platform companies. Yeah, I worked on a platform company in Seattle that used to deliver music to mobile phones back in 2004 and 2005 timeframe, and they built an app for like Razor phones, kind of the early Nokia phones and things like that would stream podcasts over a data plan. This was back in 2005, and so I was building catalogs of podcasts from all over the world for wireless carriers all over the world. So it was very early to podcast distribution to mobile phones. I mean, it just wasn't done back then. So anyway, that's kind of, and then I went to work for Microsoft, and I did stuff on the Zune podcasting platform for 7 years, and then went to work for Podcast One, and then went to work for Spreaker, and then Libsyn.
I remember using Spreaker when I first started doing podcasting, and I remember the Zune. I wish the Zune did better, because I think it was actually a really good product.
Yeah, I mean, I had a great time working on it. Here's a Zune, right?
Oh wow, old school. I like that.
Yeah, you can see there's a tombstone on the back of it.
R.I.P. Actually, also too, Windows Phone was the best phones on the market. I know 3 different.
I've got one in a drawer over here I could pull out. Yeah.
I really wish Windows Phone stuck around, because I remember having my Windows Phone and just having the customization of it. It was even better than Android at the time. And then on top of that, it was so much faster. I pulled out one of my old, what was it, like 810, 820, something like that, a couple years ago, because my phone had died and I needed something that could access the internet, or at least like Facebook Messenger or something. And while sure I couldn't put my cell phone SIM card into it, I could still actually use it in a lot of different ways. And I was able to use it, and it was still fast. After a decade, it was still fast. It was insane. Yeah,
it was Zune was ahead of its time. It was one of the few subscription music platforms that kind of birthed that concept. I think there was only one other one out there that was doing that back in those days. And it was, I'm drawing a blank on the name of it right now. It was after Napster, but anyway, I mean,
it wasn't like Pandora, was it? No, because that's later.
No, well, Pandora is mainly a streaming platform, but yeah, the whole kind of download functionality was really what the mentality was back then, and it came out of Napster. I think podcasting really was birthed out of the realization by the online space that downloading of MP3 files was the way forward, right?
And it's interesting to think about how like the iPod did popularize that term. It was funny when I first started my other show. I don't like Apple products. I've always been pretty anti-Apple. always been a Microsoft fanboy, really, too. And I actually refused to use the word podcast because it originated from the iPod for a long time until, a
lot of podcasters early on in the industry did not like the name at all. They didn't have much of a say in it because other people created it, Yeah.
Out of the 3 pillar content, you've obviously done a lot of live streaming too, but video, you're a prolific YouTuber across these different channels and worked for a lot of companies too for it. Obviously, you have plenty of audio experience and you even have some writing experience. Out of the 3 content, what's your favorite to make?
I think at this point, it's probably video at this point as a medium. I came out of a lot of audio, and I still am involved in a lot of audio. It's just that I think the energy and the excitement is more around video now. And that's been the case for, I think, since the pandemic. I think when people were forced to work from home, do more remote kind of Zoom calls and stuff like that, it really got people in the mindset. That's not to say that YouTube didn't have a huge presence back then, because they did. I mean, I did a bunch of early videos like 17 years ago on YouTube, and a lot of those early videos that I created have garnered huge watch numbers from the early days. So there's a lot of history that's in YouTube as well. And a lot of those videos were not very good videos, but for some reason they garnered a lot of views. And it's just an interesting thing. If you create new content now, I think it's more challenging to get views. But the older content that was in there, for some reason, because I ignored YouTube for many, many years, and this was just going on my profile, and I wasn't doing anything on YouTube back then. I published like maybe 20 videos, and they got over, those 20 videos got like over 1 million views. And it was like, how did that happen?
Just a testament at the time, I guess, at that point.
Well, I guess so, right? Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to that thing I was saying earlier, how people keep thinking like, oh, it's too late to become a YouTuber. I remember back in like 2015, I wasn't even a creator yet, but I remember hearing people say it. And then 2018, when I was really started doing audio and video content, because I had started blogging again in 2017, but 2018 is when I really started doing all three. And I remember hearing people say it's too late to start a podcast, too late to start YouTube. And of course, blogging was dead at that point too. And of course, in 2020, during the pandemic, like you said, everyone started to be stuck at home. A ton of podcasts came out of the woodwork and either died 6 months later or 60 episodes later because the pod fade, or they stuck around. And the ones that stuck around, I think, have done pretty well. I started doing interviews in 2020 because everyone was stuck at home. And my podcast host also created Matchmaker.fm, and eventually Podmatch came out as well. And, to find people on these tools was allowed me to get started doing interviews. And over the last 4 years, I've done over 170 interviews, which is a lot, sure. But I've met people who started doing interviews at the same time who've done 500 in that same time span. And it's crazy how people took advantage of that opportunity. And I think it's really great for them to do so.
Yeah. Though I think it's a different time now. I think if you want to get started as a content creator, I'm not sure it's as easy as it used to be. I mean, mainly from the standpoint that I think that the bar has been raised, right? I think that there's very talented creators out there that are doing terrific quality content now. It's this tug of war that I feel around doing authentic, real conversations like what a Joe Rogan does, with this expectation that we see on YouTube that the shows have to be, very highly produced and quality, with lead-ins that are enticing to get people to keep listening or watching. So it is this convergence, I think, that's going on around somehow being able to navigate quality, but yet maintaining authenticity and being real, but also driving value too. And I think it's been driving a lot of content creators towards basically more extreme content, and to capture attention. And this focus on thumbnails and graphic presentation is very interesting as well. Yeah. So I feel this heightened competitiveness in the media creation space, because guess what? We are becoming the new mainstream media. Legacy media is dying off. And so what we see happening with YouTube and what we see happening with podcasting is in the process of replacing mainstream legacy media right now with attention and trust.
I agree. And I think there's a lot of things that people don't really account for. I do think that the authenticity doesn't have to necessarily be highly edited. Although even with these interviews on both of my channels,
I agree. Yeah.
I try to make it as edited as I can. I don't particularly like editing, and I can't afford to hire it out just yet. But I try to do. I remember when that trend happened, where, like you're saying, you do the highlights at the beginning to attract that attention. That started because gamers were doing it. I remember like Minecraft videos doing that back in the day.
It's teasing people to play into the pattern that the algorithm wants to see. And that's engagement that starts high and continues, right? So you want to attract people and tease them about what they can get by continuing to listen.
And stick around.
And that's a tactic that's been around for audio for a long time too, where right at the beginning of the show, you should talk about, well, what are the topics that we're going to cover in this show? Because what you're doing is you're you're giving your audience kind of a tease about what they're going to get from this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they continue listening, then the guest is going to give the answer to those interesting questions, right? That people are feeling, but those questions need to align with what people are thinking about. And that's kind of like the X factor of creating content. And this is what I felt when I was doing my radio show, is that certain episodes did well and other episodes didn't do as well. It depends on what the topic was and how that topic matched to what people are thinking about today, right? So you have to have this match. And there's also another end of it too, is doing timely content versus doing evergreen content, right? The evergreen content is covering topics that people think about all the time, right? Versus topics that people only think about for a short period of time.
And I think I've always leaned towards evergreen with a lot of my content, but with interviews, obviously it's going to be a little bit more time sensitive in that regard.
Yeah.
Getting to another question here, what tools do you use for creation and repurposing? I always get really keen on like what people like to use, and so I'm curious.
Well, I'm playing around with Descript as well as StreamYard has some of those. I am about to sign up for the Opus Clip folks and get more involved on that on the short form side. So, but I have been playing with the vertical video short form stuff through Descript and StreamYard because they have that ability built into them. But I'm not sure that ability that they have is really at the cutting edge. I think that the Opus Clip platform is probably at the cutting edge of where that short form content creation is actually at right now. So I need to get more involved in that.
Yeah, and we could certainly talk about that more too. I joined up with them last summer. I've been in the repurposing space for years, ever since like repurpose.io came out, which is like the godfather tool of all these different repurposing tools. And all these different clipping tools came out of the woodwork last year, but none of them could really hold a candle to Opus Clip. I tried testing out Riverside's clipping. I looked at StreamYard's clipping. I think the script is working really hard on their clipping, and they have some cool features coming. I was talking to them at PodMove, and they have some cool stuff. But I still don't know if any of these other tools have such a strong discovery engine as Opus. And I think it's just because of the team behind Opus from their various different backgrounds. And that's how I grew a lot of my channels too. I was getting multiple months this year, I got over 20,000 views on my YouTube channels because of these clips that I'm posting for these interviews. And it's kind of crazy how just from doing clips.
Yeah, it can help spike your numbers. I'm not sure it really helps that much with monetization.
No,
I think that's the tug of war with it, is if you clutter your YouTube channel with too many shorts or short form content, it can kind of crowd out your long form content. So I think that there's definitely some good sides and bad sides to it.
Balance,
yeah.
And it's also really interesting to think about just other tools that have come out. Like you mentioned 11 Labs earlier, and even like Notebook LM has been making some waves recently too.
Yeah.
I just really think it's interesting how many tools have come out over the last like year and a half. And it's just, I don't know.
Are they all going to last?
That's the real question.
Are they all going to make it is always the question. Because I've seen these trends happen in the past, and it's, where a new company will come out, and what they're offering is really more likely to be a feature of a bigger platform. But it's something that a startup started to create an opportunity out there that maybe the bigger platforms weren't doing, that creators wanted to have. And what we have seen happen in the past is those startup companies either get purchased, or the existing larger platforms just incorporate the same capabilities, and it basically kills off the startup. So one way or another, a startup that's offering a service that's a feature will probably not survive as a standalone company. It's been what I've seen happen in the past, and that could happen to an Opus Clip too. I mean, that company could be acquired by a bigger platform, like a Spotify or somebody like that, and then that capability gets built into a Spotify platform to help them with their video services that they want to build out.
I've seen this a lot with like AppSumo companies, and even my old podcast hosts. I mean, they were really modern. They seemed like a really good modern marketing, really great UI, and that's the reason that attracted me to them. And over the last couple of years, it seems like they just died out. They just don't really work on the company anymore. They still host your stuff, but they're not doing anything to improve the tool. They've moved on to just doing services for high ticket clients. And they're the ones that made
what platform is that?
podcast.co.
Podcast.co. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And they also have Radio Co. And they're the ones behind Matchmaker.fm. And I recently
They're out
had
of the UK. Right.
Yeah. I recently had to move off of them because they weren't adding anything to it. I wanted to start this show, and I wasn't going to pay them more money per month to host something that wasn't really that great. And I wanted more features too. So I ended up moving to Transistor, and obviously they're one of the better ones too, but there's still obviously a lot of great tools out there. I think Captivate was also kind of captivating my attention too a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing the Captivate podcast tomorrow. So
that's awesome. I really think there's a lot of cool podcast hosts out there, and we were kind of chatting about like Flightcast too, that's coming out here soon.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see what other tools kind of come out, because I know that Transistor's doing a really good job trying to keep up with things. I know Libsyn's making some cool changes, and that's really great. Because one of the things that really detracted me from Libsyn was their interface was kind of archaic, and I just couldn't deal with that.
Yeah. Well, it was the first podcasting platform, and back in 2004 is when they started. And actually, that same startup team that started Libsyn, actually, I don't know if you knew this, but created the podcast platform originally for National Public Radio. So it was kind of made at the same time, and that's why you saw National Public Radio kind of grow in popularity very early in the podcasting spaces, because Libsyn built their publishing tool for podcasts and then built that for NPR at the same time almost.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So you've done a lot of speaking and presenting. How does someone go from podcast to speaking?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I think it just happens over time as you build your brand and your reputation in a particular space. And I had done a lot of podcasts and TV and radio and stuff like that in the past. And so it just evolved for me over time. I mean, it never was easy. I mean, back when I started speaking at conferences and events and things like that, it made me nervous to get up in front of people like that. And then just over a period of time and just the number of events that I've done over the years, it just got easier and easier. And I think at the end of the day, it got back to just being confident in your knowledge and what you understand and keeping up with it. And I tried to bring to those experiences, more authentic kind of perceptions, and not be as scripted, and just kind of speak from the heart and speak more from my experience, kind of like what we're doing here. And just, it doesn't always turn out perfect. And I was okay with that. And I think that also reflects what the tension that I feel out there is, that I think that there is a higher expectation of, if you're giving presentations now, that you have to really deliver, you have to deliver something that's inspiring, and you have to deliver something that's going to change somebody's life, and that people will get up and cheer. And that's what drives this kind of move towards more extreme content, right? That drives an emotional response, oftentimes good or bad.
Yeah.
And I think a good example of this is Gary Vaynerchuk, who I've known for many, many years. I met him back in 2007.
No.
And before he actually got his stardom that you see now. And I've been to a few of his live presentations that he's done, and he's always been very kind of extreme. Though I would say over the last, and I think it gets back to the fact that he's getting older, he's kind of moderated himself a little bit. I've seen him, like I saw him on stage at a radio conference in Dallas. This was a few years ago. And he got up on stage and just ripped them a new one about what was happening to radio, and that they needed to get their shit together. Also,
sounds like Gary.
Also, they were going to die, right? So, being able to get up on stage and talk like that is unusual, right? And that's what's interesting about the space, is that the people that are able to garner attention, even like a Tony Robbins, right? He's up on stage. He's an inspiring speaker. He connects with people in the audience, and he understands and he listens. And it's just a dynamic that that you have to create around you and your personality. And it's not everybody has it, right? It's this X factor of being a successful podcaster, like some of the biggest podcasters in the world. I mean, you look at them and you go, well, I can do that, right?
And then when you do it, it's different.
Right, exactly. But you're not. I mean, you're doing it, but you're not getting 1 billion views on your episode every week, right?
Yeah.
And why is that happening? Why is that happening to him but not to you? And I think those are the tug of wars that content creators now have, is that they see these big, very successful podcasters and they think to themselves, well, I can do that too. But what they don't think about is all of the other things that those content creators did back in the early days. Like I helped Mr. Adam Carolla kind of get started back in 2009, and his team, I mean, he came out of syndicated radio and couldn't do podcasting for a while. So when he started, he wasn't doing anything commercial from the standpoint of having ads or sponsors, because he was still under contract on his radio agreement that he couldn't monetize. So back when he got started, he actually just was creating content, right? And that's how he built the show. And same with Joe Rogan, it's the same with Mark Maron. All those guys they had a personality that connected with people because they were either stand-up comics or that they had done TV before. And so, these are the things that go around this medium now that are not new, but I think a lot of people misunderstand how these people got to where they are.
I definitely asked that question kind of in a selfish reason because I want to do speaking more. I've only done like a virtual speaking gig, and I definitely would love to do it at some point. But you mentioned Gary Vee, and he definitely has that boisterous kind of personality, even after he moderated
a very
a little
extreme kind of personality, right? Yeah.
And I remember like back in 2019, before the pandemic, people were still kind of like, oh, he's being a little too hyperbolic, if you will, and stuff like that. And something that he kept saying in multiple keynotes, I try to watch what he did. Like, that's what he said sometimes. He would say it at the end of his keynotes, like, don't just trust what I'm saying, watch what I'm doing. And I tried to do that. I tried watching what he's doing. I tried watching his strategy even before he released that slide deck. And something he kept saying over and over again is that you need to be posting 100 times a day. And people kept hearing that and thinking, oh, I can't do that. That's crazy. That's ridiculous. And I tried to flip the script. I was like, well, then how do I do that? I didn't need to be convinced. I just needed to figure out, how does that work? And while I may not be doing that right now, I definitely have that strategy in place and trying to like work on that. And I think it's something that, as a budding podcaster or creator trying to flip the script, don't think, oh, I can't do that, or it's too big, it's too saturated. Try to figure out how. And that's kind of the mindset.
Well, and what Gary oftentimes doesn't tell you is that he's got a whole production team behind him, right? That follows him everywhere he goes and is constantly filming him, right? So you kind of, he's not always entirely transparent about his advice versus what he's doing. He has the resources to, like I say, have a couple of producers that are with him at all times. They're carrying cameras. They're capturing him in these kind of raw moments that he is out there in the world, and I think it's been very powerful because Gary does care about people, and that comes across in his video. He's extreme in his approach, but yet he comes across as caring about individuals, right? And their journeys. And I think to some degree you can translate that even to like an Elon Musk. I think he has that ability too. I think he has a speaking challenge, right? But he's been able to blow through that. And, I remember hearing Elon Musk speak like maybe five years ago or so, and he really struggled. I mean, he couldn't even really do a presentation back then, really, and get through it smoothly. But he's done so much of it now that he's just had this repetition of being put in those positions that he's gotten progressively better, right? That was kind of my experience too. I mean, I always I haven't always been a terrific speaker myself, even though I've been in radio and I've been in doing all this stuff. And so I can totally appreciate that. And oftentimes a lot of people come from that, right? Or they don't
Mhm.
feel comfortable and they feel awkward, or they don't feel like they can speak in a way that's going to engage people. What you have to see out there is that there are examples of people that just put themselves out there and struggled through it. And as you get better, your audience grows. As you and also another factor is it's more about what you do, not so much what you say.
Mhm.
So I think that's a big factor driving the success of people today, is that they see massive success and then they like to follow those people because people like to follow successful people. So, and it gets back to, and then if they feel like they can trust what those people are saying, that's maybe they shouldn't trust, but they do because this person sounds like this is a real person, right?
Mhm. It's all kind
So,
of trust and experience and just roughing it out. I mean, Roberto Blake always talks about the first 100 reps. Like, you just got to get through those reps because otherwise you don't know what you don't know. And that happened with the interviews. I think I was one of the most prepared people you could ever be when it comes to
yeah,
doing interviews. I'd done so much research, but it wasn't until I
yeah,
actually started doing them where I realized, oh, my intro needs to be changed. My whole flow of the show needed to be tweaked at one point. And then, like,
yeah.
56 episodes in, I had to change my intro again and stuff like that. It's just one of those things where you have to put in the reps before you get good at stuff.
Yeah, and I'm starting to get to a point now where it's like don't do a lot of kind of pre anything, right?
Mm.
Just kind of get right into the conversation. I think that's the expectation on YouTube. So if you're thinking about being a YouTube creator, if you need to do a bunch of prep, which I do agree with preparing and
Mhm.
getting an idea of what you want the content to be, but then it's so important to quickly tease at the beginning and then get right into the content. Don't have, and I've been playing, I mean, I don't always like to do that, so
Mhm.
sometimes I don't. And sometimes I'll, especially on the video side, I'll play like a chunk of video at the very beginning that isn't just with me,
Mhm.
and just kind of setting things up. But I don't see as much success with that. It's almost like the content that you create now on like the video platforms is you really got to get to the value like right in the first 30
Yeah.
seconds, right? If you don't, then people are going to the next video.
And there's definitely, I kind of agree when it comes to the preparation, but also slightly disagree in the case of like this context. Like this show, I try not to over prepare too much because I want to get into the
Yeah.
nitty gritty with you. I did do a decent amount of
Yeah.
research because you have so much online, obviously, Rob,
Yeah.
that like I wanted to make sure I covered a lot of my bases. But
Right.
I even said in the email, like I didn't make that many questions because I knew that we would go on a lot of tangents like this. My
Sure.
other show is about being multidisciplinary, being polymathic. And so I kind of have to do my research in order to figure out what are the different areas of discipline that this person has, because I don't want to miss out on something. So I always kind of went overboard on research with that show. For this show, I try not to as much. I do want to do a little bit because it's force a habit, but I also enjoy it. But that's, again, personal preference versus like need, if you will.
Yeah, I think it does make sense to make the journey with a guest like this a authentic journey for you, right? Which
Mhm.
is, you don't really have all the answers or know what the questions should be because you're actually listening and you're actually having a conversation, not an interview.
Mhm.
And I think that is something that's a fine line to walk, right? Is that you want to make sure what you get out of the interview is the value that you would like for your community and the topic of your show. But at the same time, this authentic conversation can go on in a bunch of different directions. And you want to be open to that because there might be a topic that you hadn't thought of that the
Yeah.
guest mentions that you really want to dive into, right? That you really want to explore that you hadn't thought of. And that's enlightening to you too.
Like the Gary Vee stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think the role as a host is to be the orchestrator of the conversation. Obviously the guest has a part of it too,
Oh yeah.
but as a host, I had to decide: do I move on to the next question, or do I prompt what you just said next? And that's kind of a instantaneous decision you have to make.
Yeah, it's
And
about
like
value. What's the
yeah,
value in the conversation? Right.
And I tried also to make sure I active listen. It's not a skill that came naturally to me. I like to talk. I like to talk. And so I
Well, and
knew from
that's
the beginning.
and that's the tug of war too, is that you've prepared a bunch of questions, and I think it's outstanding to do that, but yet at the same time be willing to just throw half of them out, right?
Yeah.
And just not go there because that's not the path the conversation went.
I've already mentally skipped a couple questions just because
Yeah,
like you either
right.
already answered them or there's like something else. The
Right.
one I do want to ask too is like, how's being a podcast and radio broadcaster for over 2 decades changed your life? Because I'm curious about that.
Well, it's given me all sorts of opportunities. I mean, it's a different path than I thought I was going to head down when I graduated from college, and I got a marketing degree and have worked for many years in the grocery food industry, and actually have owned a restaurant. And I used to work for the Florida Department of Citrus and as a kind of a marketing person. And so I thought that I was going to be, and a lot of the jobs in my history have been like marketing director and things like that for companies. And I've been in, national sales and been a sales rep and been a field marketing manager type of roles. So all those things kind of took me down this path of around media, right? Because I was working with radio and I was working with TV, all those kind of things in a lot of those jobs in the early years. And so it kind of conditioned me to really embrace what was happening with the internet and what was happening with the web. And it took me down this path, which took me down kind of a digital content marketing path. And that's where it kind of took me, is that it took me down. I wasn't a video creator, but I did a lot of TV and I did a lot of radio back in those days, because those were the mediums that there was a lot of reach and it was very relevant back then. But then I was open to this pathway around technology to move towards more digital media and thinking about that as a content marketing tool, as a marketing professional. And what's happened to me is that I'm not a marketing professional anymore. I'm more of a kind of a content creator, which kind of came out of that, and then helping other content creators to take advantage of the content marketing opportunity that is out there. And I think what we're seeing now is that we're kind of moving a little bit beyond this concept of content marketing and more into content communities is where we're kind of moving into. And it's almost like we've moved beyond the marketing element of content because that has this perception of being a little too commercial. And is it trustworthy? Into this phase of building more authentic, trustworthy community around content now. And I think that's the big Uber shift that we're seeing happen right now. And you can see it with these big formerly mainstream media creators that have shifted over to digital, right? Really building their own private communities, building their own paid communities, as well as building, what has been termed a freemium model for many years, where you have some free and some paid. I think Tucker Carlson is a good example of a guy that came out of mainstream media and built his own online digital network that he didn't have before, and he's done that in like a year, and he's probably far more successful now. On the digital side, his audiences are so much bigger than he was when he was on Fox News. Right. That it's a remarkable transformation that's happening. He's built a paid community around his content, and that didn't exist really in the past.
That shift from the old type to the new type. I think you're right too with this different change in the media. And I was also thinking about the dynamic of the different jobs you have. Like I spent some time in the grocery stores as well, so I feel you on that. And I saw on your LinkedIn you had a content marketer or content creator role at one of the companies. And I think this change of having an in-house creator is going to be really interesting too.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the companies now are realizing that they have to be kind of like a creator in order to thrive in this new ecosystem. And that was one of the things that I felt like I was weak, kind of coming out of working for, let's say, Ellipson or Podbean or Podcast One, was kind of being a little bit too focused on very narrow tool sets, right? Of really focusing on promoting that particular tool as opposed to being a content creator that is able to use all the tools and figure out what's the best tools. And I saw this transition with AI being like a catalyst of like, I've got to open my mind to change, because we're going through a massive change cycle. And what happens at the end of this cycle, and it's the same thing that happened to me when I started my radio show before I got into podcasting, is that what was emerging was going to emerge, and I needed to be ready for it. So at the end of the day, that's kind of what I've been going through for the last year or so, is doing that transition into what's next and being knowledgeable about what's next. It's not that it's easy. I have a lot of other things that I'm working on, like I'm the chairperson of the Podcast Hall of Fame. So that's a project that I've been involved in. Actually, that started back in 2015 and has been evolving over the years. We inducted Mr. Adam Carolla last year, and I had Dr. Drew was my master of ceremonies. And so that's another project that I'm working on. I'm trying to build my own podcast network now. Mm-hmm. And so, as taking advantage of my relationships with content creators and being one myself, but it does challenge me because I want to be a content creator, but my time is getting pulled away from that to helping others again.
Yeah. So, thanks for being here for that. Just real quick.
It's fine.
That's the reason why I made this show too, is I enjoyed talking to creators. Even on my other show, if they were a creator, it would only be maybe a fourth of the conversation would be about content. And I wanted to dive more into that and also try to figure out, like, what does it mean to be a modern content creator? That's the kind of slogan of this channel too, no less. The modern content creator, like, what is the meta right now? How do you really go about doing that? And I also wanted to ask you, like, what are you thinking that you're working towards? What innovations do you think are happening right now that you're trying to adapt to?
Yeah, I want to get more into multi-camera video productions and kind of move down that path. I don't know that what I'm doing with that is really, like I say, kind of at the forefront or somehow new. I think in some ways it's a pathway to what mainstream media has been doing for many years. So it's a reflection of kind of a higher expectation of the video production side of content as people consume these video podcasts more on smart televisions, that there's an elevated expectation. They don't watch as much mainstream media, but they're watching more video podcasts. So those video podcasts need to be, I think in the long run, they're going to need to be equal in production quality to what people experienced on broadcast television.
More visually interesting too.
Yeah, and so what's different about them is the types of conversations, the more authentic, more trustworthy conversations, the openness to all sorts of topics. And I think at the end of the day, that really takes us into this kind of vortex of this struggle over free speech, right? And how people are seeing content as being misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, all this kind of stuff like that are all factors in this evolution of our consumption patterns around media now, is that there's an expectation that now we're not time restricted based on a cable channel that's live streaming in a 1 hour block or half hour blocks. We're consuming all sorts of content that can be 3 hours, can be 4 hours long, and they're in-depth conversations that can be perceived as trustworthy content, authentic content that mainstream media really hasn't been able to fulfill if we look back in time.
And one of the questions I had actually here today was about the multicam setup. The only thing I kind of thought of was having a vertical camera. I have the Logitech StreamCam that has like a accelerometer. So when you rotate it, it naturally, in all the different softwares, projects as vertical, which is nice, not having to manually change it in like OBS. But then there's also the concept of just having, like, if you and I talking in real life, we'd have the camera that faces both of us, but then we have the camera that's just you, the camera that's just me. kind of going back to that multicam setup, and it's like, how do we do that as creators? Do we have multiple DSLRs, or do you use the Mevo camera app or something like that? Or so many different options, and then what are the best ones to use and stuff like that.
Yeah, and this concept of multi-camera really focuses on trying to do more in-person conversations, not so much doing a multi-camera with like what we're doing here. Though I think that the AI technology is going to be able to create the same type of experience as a multi-camera shoot in a recording like this, and I do think like the Opus Clip platform is moving down that path where it's creating that kind of back and forth kind of video experience that could be a good experience on TVs versus this kind of like a box next to each other type of an experience. So it's what you do with what is created that is more, I guess, appealing to the viewer is the direction that we're heading down.
Trying to change the visuals aspect too. When I was mentioning Valkyrie's podcast, Press Escape, I think is what it's called, I remember watching it and I was paying attention to what they were saying, but at one point I found myself kind of watching the camera changes and going from the one person to the other person speaking, then going to the whole screen. Yeah. And what other things could you do to like make that more interactive? Like maybe have a top down or something like that, or have a different angle to that same person. Like there's different things you can do. And even AI might be able to generate the background and change the angle, like you're kind of saying there. It'll be kind of interesting. Well,
I think AI is going to be able to play around with those shots and do something, where it zooms in and it pulls back, or it does things with the video. And it gets back to, well, what's the quality of the video? So all the things that I'm looking to do going forward are basically minimum of 4K. Mm-hmm. But I know that some of these kind of cameras that are coming out now that are affordable are 8K now. So we're basically up in the game. I've got a 360 degree video camera too that goes up to 6K. But I do know that they've come out. It's the Insta 360 X3 is what I have. I did notice that the X4 came out and it's 8K. So you can see what's happening is that we're elevating the screen kind of resolution and the image quality to an extreme level. I mean, it's going to be like realistic.
I probably should have turned on to 4K for this interview because we're both using 4K cameras. Well, the thing is,
but the technology hasn't really progressed as much around webcams. My converter that I have that's running on this to my 4 camera or my 4K camcorder that I'm using for this, that thing only supports 1080p. So I would have to upgrade that to a 4K, and I don't even know if the camera will export 4K into it. So but as these cameras get higher resolution and native support, and then as they get, as people upgrade and things like that, I know YouTube supports 4K. I don't think that they're up to 8K yet. So it's a progression, but at some point, whether it's a year from now or 2 years, we'll be up at 6 and 8K probably on all these video platforms.
Well, as much as I love nerding out about this kind of stuff, I know that we'll keep going. So getting to the last question here.
Sure.
What do you have coming down the line that you're looking forward to?
Well, I have in January, I've got the Podcast Hall of Fame ceremony where we're going to be inducting another 10 significant contributors to the podcast space at PodFest down in Orlando on January 17th is the date of that. So that event is still being pulled together, but that's the big thing that I'm looking forward to right now. And then just, how things are going to evolve with the online content creator space. What's going to happen with YouTube? Is the industry going to increasingly embrace video from a platform kind of view, or is the industry just going to allow YouTube to kind of just dominate everything? And I think that there's a danger of that, and I think there's also a danger that we lose some traction around RSS as these big proprietary platforms kind of increasingly kind of shy away from it. And that's been moving that direction for many years, actually. It's just been a slow evolutional shift that the RSS-based podcasting is increasingly going to be, neutralized, and that there's going to be more kind of API focused publishing. And I think your conversation around Flightcast is a little bit of a reflection of that trend line.
I'm curious to see if even Flightcast or other tools, if they can really popularize maybe the video RSS, and that way, instead of YouTube becoming the more monopoly, it could be more like, okay, Apple, Spotify, and YouTube all gets video, and then you also have the audio cast too. But that's kind of hopeful thinking.
Yes. So there's two parts to that. Is that based on what I've heard is that most of the video creators don't really care about video RSS right now. So it's more about just publishing to these platforms like we see with YouTube. I mean, if you look at what YouTube is doing with podcasting today, they're just importing audio files and then converting them into making a video, right? Yeah. And that's being done as an RSS delivery method, but they're caching that content and redistributing it. So increasingly what we're going to see is kind of like a direct publishing, which both Spotify and YouTube embrace that right now. The big question mark is, how is Apple going to respond to this? Apple has video podcasting built into their podcast app today in their platform, but they don't really surface it. They don't really make it visible like they used to in the early days of podcasting. If they make that shift, that could change the conversation a little bit around video podcasting from an RSS standpoint. If Apple really embraces it and goes all in on that. Yeah. I've talked to Apple and I've encouraged them to head down that path because the industry is moving towards video, and they have video. They're just not doing anything with it.
And even Spotify's not doing that great with it too. I tried using their app to upload my video files, and it just broke on me almost every other time I used it. And it's like, okay, then why should I try?
Well, video RSS could be a solution for them to that, but they haven't chose to embrace. Same thing with YouTube. They haven't chose to embrace getting video files from RSS feeds. And that could be kind of like a leading edge kind of thing that they could do. I mean, for me, it's not leading edge, but it's more like embracing the infrastructure that's there right now that they can all take advantage of to further their platforms, but they're not. So that's a missed opportunity in my view.
I agree. Well, Rob, where can people find you online if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I have a website, robgreenlee.com, and I also have a YouTube channel at Rob Greenlee. I'm also on X at Rob Greenlee. I'm also on LinkedIn at Rob Greenlee. If you just type that in, I'm sure you'll find me, or just do a search in any of the search platforms, Chat GPT, you just put my name in there and you'll get all sorts of resources now, especially after Chat GPT now has more embraced the web in their results, right? So those are the best ways.
It's more of an audio confirmation because I got links for you down below. I can't believe that I haven't done that with ChatGPT. I have not done that with ChatGPT. I haven't asked them to look up this guest for me. And I probably should at some point. I
think you'd be surprised. It could build a whole bio for you, right? So you're ready to go.
That's crazy. Well, this is Dustin PolyInnovator and Rob Greenlee on the PolyTools Creator Spotlight. Thank you for joining me, man.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Dustin. Yeah.
It was good.